For me, I'm very much, I'm here's a problem. Let's take care of it. I have a solution for that.
Our goal when we opened was to provide the highest quality care that was possible at a price people could afford.
I literally talk to physicians daily. Kelly, I can't even log in to see my own billing. I have no idea what's going on. I get a report once a month and nobody can explain it to me. I make it a point to train the physicians how to go and pull their own report.
I'm going to be on the course reporting tomorrow afternoon.
You are?
I am. I'm going to follow Jordan Spieth and Will Zalatoris and Scotty Scheffler. I'm not really reporting, but I am going to go watch the course.
Probably drink a couple beers.
Yeah, I might have a beer or two tomorrow afternoon. I mean, that would make my commentary even better. Well, hello, folks. Welcome to episode number 13 of the Cutting Edge podcast. It's great to be on the show with everybody today. And CJ is on the other end of the studio, going to be taking the questions today and has allowed me to host. The name of our episode today is called The Evolving Business of Surgical Assisting. And so we're excited to talk a little bit about surgical assisting and how that business has evolved. But first, we want to say thank you to some of our sponsors who, without them, this just simply wouldn't be possible. First, of course, TexAssist. You'll get to hear a little bit more about what they're doing in the surgical assistant space today. Ortho Lone Star, just a terrific group that we featured now a couple of different times in our first 12 episodes. Moonshot Marketing, Jen Eaton, and all of her efforts to help us get out on the World Wide Web. We're available everywhere, so you can listen to our shows on Apple iTunes, YouTube, Instagram, you name it. We're there. Look for The Cutting Edge Podcast, and you'll find us. And then last but not least is the Carrington Group, a firm that I represent here in Dallas that specializes in the family office space. So we're excited to have CJ with us on the show today. And CJ, like we typically do with our guests, I think it would be best just to start off. And why don't you share a little bit of your background and tell us a little bit about your group and how you got into the business?
Sure. So, by upbringing, I'm a native of the Midwest, grew up in Wisconsin, went to school at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. So go Badgers. That helps frame up old Bucky in the background, pouting his chest out. I have, by kind of a journeyman status, found my way to Texas in 2003 and was pursuing professional golf at the time as a living, and ultimately took on retirement due to medical issues. And lo and behold, met somebody that was in the medical industry that was looking for some help. So
I didn't know that you tried to play professional golf. Where did that stall out for you? How far did you get?
I qualified for, I'm underqualified for the Greater Milwaukee Open in 01. Mm-hmm. So got to the big stage for 1 week. Lost in a playoff 2 weeks later in the John Deere Classic qualifier. Shot 64 and couldn't make it. But I played, man, I've played from Maine to Spain. You name the mini tour, I've played it, including state opens and Monday qualifiers. So spent almost 4 years of my career chasing that.
Boy, I'll tell you what, I play a lot of golf with you now. Things sure have changed.
Just a little. It's way more of a power game now than it ever was back then.
Yeah, for sure, man. I was actually talking about your game, but
Well, I mean, hey, life happens. I'm actually kind of proud of myself. Honestly, I'm not that much worse than I was when I was playing for a living.
No, just giving you a
couple shots worse.
Just giving you a hard time. For our guests out there, CJ, for a guy that plays as little as he does now, still just absolutely stripes it on the golf course. So
yeah, and by the way, I did qualify for the Texas Mid-Am last week. So
hey, congratulations. What'd you shoot?
73. Had to birdie the last and standing over a 10-footer and buried it to get in on the number.
I love it, man. Where's that being held this year?
The club's at Houston Oaks.
Right.
Down in the Houston area. So what is that, second weekend of September? So we'll anxiously await that event. That will be one of the few things that I play in this year. So excited about that. So I'll tell you a little bit about my healthcare journey. So I started in home health and hospice, just calling on physicians and hospitals. In particular, I was a guy that worked the halls, engaging with social workers and case managers to generate referrals. When I did work in hospice, I actually met with families who were making that difficult decision. So I was frontline in the middle of it at 24 years old, 25 years old. Man, a harsh introduction, but
Wow.
I spent 3 years doing that.
I was just going to ask what some of the things that you took away and learned from that, CJ. I mean, that
Oh my
had
gosh,
to be a pretty life altering experience.
Oh, it's an incredible life altering experience, right? Because you deal with people, you're dealing with patients who are highly vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
and with family members who are just emotionally unprepared.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the amount of empathy that I still carry with me to this day for people who are hurting and who are in the process of mourning the pending loss of loved ones. I mean, that stuff doesn't leave you. That's for sure. So I just a great training ground for me to really get a hold of just the seriousness of the healthcare business. And it's not just about money; it's about people. It's really a lot more about people than anything else. So I was there for 3 years. Spent the next 6 to 7 years of my life in bariatrics. Actually was recruited to be the first full-time dedicated sales professional for a specialty nutrition company that made products for weight loss surgery patients. The company is called Bariatric Advantage. Worked for just a crazy talented CEO founder. And in the middle of my tenure with them, I actually was pushed to leave the company and go take on a surgical device sales position with Covidian, which is now owned by Medtronic. And I got about a year and a half of in the jowls of the OR surgical sales experience, selling surgical stapling products, hernia products. So I got a highly, highly technical degree of training as a surgical device rep, because you are the Duke, and when it comes right down to it, your job is to keep the doc out of trouble. So got some awesome training, Fortune 100 training there, and then ultimately left the nutrition space to start TexAssist. So was just fortunate. Timing's everything. I was a member at Dallas Athletic Club. I had worked with a gentleman back in my first role as a home health rep back starting in 04. He and I crossed paths on the range with a common friend who was an orthopedic surgeon back in middle of July 2013. It was 4th of July weekend. Hey, what you doing? You still messing with that surgical assist stuff that you were talking about? Yeah, I've never got anything started. 10 weeks later, or I'm sorry, 6 weeks later, we had 13 orthopedic surgeons in the room who all had the same common problem. And 2 hours later, we came out with 12 of those 13 surgeons committed to using our service and actually helping us recruit our first 5 surgical assistants. And in about 100 days, we went from concept to covering our first surgery.
Wow.
Back in mid 2013. So it's been a wild ride. I mean, it's hard to imagine that in October we'll celebrate 8 years in business. It's just been a crazy learning curve, because if one thing is constant, it's change, especially in healthcare.
It's been really interesting for me over the last several weeks. And I know at the beginning when we launched this podcast, we spent a lot of time talking about the challenges in your space, but I didn't realize just how much a surgical assistant meant to a surgery and to the success of a surgery and to the speed of a surgery and to the outcome of the overall surgery. Talk a little bit about that first, and then just a little bit about how the industry has evolved for you.
Yeah. So, I think it's amazing all the role players. We in sports we talk about role players all the time. In healthcare, it is even more real because everybody has such a high degree of specialization in what they do that without that particular role player that can execute on command in a timely fashion, the OR turns into chaos, and the surgical assistant acts as the second set of hands, operating alongside the surgeon. They are specifically trained to be able to perform many of the same functions as the surgeon. And in fact, in many cases, because of scope of practice, the surgeon will actually defer to the surgical assistant to perform those functions. They're just because they're better. They have more practice. They have more. They just have more skill. And without the surgical assistant being there to work side by side with the surgeon, there's been study after study that's shown that surgical times increase substantially, surgical site infections increase, complication rates increase, just medical errors overall increase, and the quality of the outcome gets compromised.
I got a good chuckle, CJ. I can't remember what guest it was, but it was a doc that we had on that uses a surgical assistant for every surgery. And he looked at us at the end of talking about how valuable surgical assistants are. And he said, I can't remember the last time I stitched a patient up.
Yeah, no, and you know what? What's quite interesting, Tyler, in our business, up until the past couple of years, we've never talked with patients either pre-surgery or post-surgery. It's been an afterthought because of how the economics and how the revenue cycles worked. But we now have those conversations every time, and it is amazing when we turn on that light switch for the patient, how they realize just how big of a role the surgical assistant actually plays. I mean, the surgeon's only got two hands, right? And sometimes it takes 4 or 5 hands to safely perform the procedure. So
CJ, I mean, walk our audience a little bit through. I mean, why can't the nurses just handle that stuff? Like, why?
Yeah, good question, right? I mean, what you're going to find, what you find is that there are 4 to 5 critical members of the operating room team. You obviously have the surgeon, you have the surgical assistant, you have a scrub tech who is, or a surgical tech who is responsible for managing instrumentation, managing instrument count, making sure that all the tools are on command or on hand to perform the procedure in sequence at speed and with efficiency. You then have a circulating nurse who is outside the surgical field itself. So the surgical field is sterile, right? It's like an invisible pane of glass that surrounds the patient. Once that patient is open, not anyone can step in and operate. There are tight protocols. So the circulating nurse is responsible for calling out what instruments are being used, documenting what's happening at what times of the procedure, documenting when there's issues. If they run into a scenario where the patient has to be taken from a laparoscopic case to an open case and they need more instruments, the surgical tech isn't going to break scrub. They're not going to break sterile field. That circulating nurse is out of the room and running down the hall to grab those tools and bring them in and get them on the mail stand so they can go to town. So a nurse is not trained to standard nurses are not trained to operate, right? They've had anatomy class, but they don't know anatomy that intimately to be able to step in and do that role, right? It's highly specialized, just like a scrub tech isn't going to do the circulating nurse's job. Goes both ways.
It's fascinating. We had a couple of nurses on with us, or excuse me, surgical assistants on with us several episodes back. And I was just completely blown away and fascinated on what they're expected to do on any given day, from trying to make sure that they do all that they have to do inside of the operating room. But then what really happens outside of the operating room that really makes their job challenging, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you that there's, the technical aspect of this job, it's not easy to attain those skills. So in the state of Texas, in order for you to get to be eligible for licensure as a surgical assistant, after you've done all your schooling, you have to have 2,000 operating room hours of work under wing as a surgical assistant before you ever become eligible for licensure consideration. Okay,
Wow.
so that's just the technical part of it. And you may or may not be getting paid. Most surgical assistants don't get paid for that training. That's an unpaid apprenticeship. Okay, so now you come outside the operating room and now you have to deal with the business of surgical assisting. So, one of the things, Tyler, that's just changed tremendously in the near 8 years that we've been in business, this used to be a really simple cycle of events. You get the case assigned to you, you show up, you collect the billing information from the doctor's office, and you submit the bill to the insurance, and the insurance pays according to the stated benefits, maybe after 1 or 2 appeals. Okay, that is not even remotely close to how things work anymore. So there has been a huge shift in healthcare benefit structures because of the ever increasing cost of healthcare delivery. So traditionally, surgical assistants have operated out of network because they run mom and pop shops and rates just haven't been favorable to go in network. That's now starting to get taken away. And we are in a major, major value shift in that environment. I'll tell you something else that's changed tremendously in the last 8 years is the movement and inclusion of surgical robotics. So, 8 years ago, it was rare that you saw robotics being used in many, many specialties. It is now the opposite of that. It is rare that robotics is not used in many specialties like urology and colorectal surgery and surgical oncology, where we're dealing with high acuity surgeries in very tight spaces and very low margins for error. I will tell you that the other things that have really changed a lot, we now have massive onset of value-based care models and bundled payments into our healthcare system. So how are surgical assistants playing ball, right? Never had to deal with anything like that before. And quite honestly, most surgical assistants are not built to be business people. They are built to be clinicians. So it's scaring the daylights out of people because people don't know how to react. And right now, inaction is the worst thing that could happen because you're going to end up being left at the wayside. There's 2 other things, Tyler, that really have been major, major changes here. One is consumers are way better educated today than they were 8 years ago in terms of healthcare, thanks to the internet, thanks to Mr. Google.
Yeah.
So
much accurate information you get from him too.
Yeah. I mean, I would tell you that the consumer is much more armed to ask appropriate questions. But at the same time, it's also made it more difficult because patients think they can push back. And there's certain things that they don't think they need because they read it on the internet. Mm-hmm. And it's created a huge, it's a tough spot, especially for the surgical assistant, because we don't demand or drive the referral. The surgeon says, I need you. Now we're left with explaining why the surgeon needs us because the surgeon doesn't normally take the time to say it. Right. And the final thing I would say that's been a huge change, and we're going to talk about this here in a few minutes in more detail, but legislation, state and federal legislation, has completely changed the game of the business of surgical assisting. It's intended to remove bad actors, but like with anything, intent can be good, but the actual deliverables of what's occurred and what is actively occurring right now with pending legislation that's going to be implemented on the federal level in January of 22 could have devastating effects.
So great segue there, CJ. Let's talk a little bit about, in your opinion, where the industry is headed. We just heard a lot about the challenges that surgical assistants face, but where's the industry headed now that we're getting our hands on this new legislation and getting your head wrapped around that? Where's this thing headed?
I mean, I think this to me, if I take a step back and I look at history, has a tendency to repeat itself. So if we look at other healthcare professionals that have been reliant in surgery, that are reliant on the physician referral, the number one group that comes to mind is anesthesia. 10, 15 years ago, Tyler, anesthesia operated very much in a fragmented market, many small groups, even some mom and pop 1 and 2 man shops. Well, through rule changes and reimbursement changes and all these external forces, consolidation had to occur to help drive down the cost of care delivery and still maintain some degree of margin. Surgical assisting is at an inflection point, no doubt about it, right? The days of being a sole practitioner, living on your own, doing your own thing, ignoring the legislation and the rules that are out there, I will tell you, for those type of folks that think they can just stick their head in the sand and ignore it and it's going to be okay, they're wrong, right? There is power in numbers. There's power in numbers for a lot of reasons, whether it's negotiating with payers, whether it's trying to fend off negative impacts of legislation, whether it's trying to reduce overhead cost as a percentage of your overall burn. We are in the same point that anesthesia was 10 to 15 years ago. And for better or for worse, my belief is people need to embrace it and start talking to each other and start figuring out how we can band together rather than trying to resist what is being pushed on us. Embrace it, innovate. I will tell you that there is no doubt that because of benefit cost or benefit structures themselves, surgical assistants are losing leverage daily when it comes to reimbursements. It was really interesting to sit and listen to Scott Flannery from United Healthcare last week, the CEO for North Texas and Oklahoma, on our podcast, and listen to him about this intersection of improving quality and reducing overall cost of the episode, but not necessarily reducing the reimbursement of the provider. Because I think that's a huge misunderstanding by our surgical assistant community. They think, oh, the insurance guys are out to get everybody. There's no way I'm going to deal with them. There's no way I can win. And that's just simply not true. But the insurance companies are not going to deal with every mom and pop surgical assistant. They just aren't. There's not enough bandwidth and not enough time in the day. So who are they going to deal with? They're going to deal with the larger groups who have their crap together, who can collectively develop a strategy to deliver higher quality care, have some quality metrics in place, and the insurance companies will pay for it.
Sure.
They may not pay as well as we did 5 years ago out of network, but I can guarantee you it's going to be a whole lot better than the BS base rate that they want to pay any Joe Schmo that just wants to take what they're throwing at him.
CJ, talk a little bit about TexAssist and what you guys are doing to do exactly that, to band together to create something that's bigger and better. And I think what I heard is you band together with a quality group and the insurance companies open their ears. They're willing to listen.
100%. I will tell you that to me, there's 3 pillars to this movement for TexAssist. Pillar number 1 is building the best quality clinician arsenal in the business, right? The best clinicians deliver the best outcomes and will ultimately be rewarded in this. So we are actively pursuing relationships and engagements with the best clinicians in their specialties, but also creating internal training programs and structures to amp up the quality and experience level of the staff that is on our team. If we leave that to chance, can't do it. Two, if we do it that way, healthcare systems are indicating in conversations that we've had over the past 6 months, we are the type of group that they want to be engaged with, because there are things that we are doing from a quality perspective and from an internal process improvement perspective that is going to ensure that the healthcare system doesn't have to worry about whether we're going to put an undertrained or untrained surgical assistant in a spot that when shit hits the fan and there's a complication, they're not going to be able to respond in a timely manner, and the outcome is going to get compromised. So the second part, so part one is technical proficiency with the people we have. Part two is health system engagements and corporate engagements, because the other thing the health systems don't want to do is they don't want to deal with every single independent assistant that says, hey, I want a contract. What they do want to deal with is one contract, one invoice, one check, one set of terms. And then that contractor is required to deal with everything behind the fence on their side. The third pillar to this is our ability, again, I go back to our ability to have reasonable, honest conversations with the payers, right? If we have quality metrics in place, if we can prove that we have internal infrastructure in place to ensure that we have the strongest technicians that are operating on patients to substantially reduce risk and substantially reduce the exposure for a bad outcome, the insurance companies are a lot more likely to plug in and give us what we're asking for. We've gotten it with Cigna. We've proven with our very first payer, beyond a doubt, that these payers will talk, but it's getting to the right person that has the right amount of leverage or decision-making power and sees the whole picture. I will tell you, one of the things that we fight is that the layers of bureaucracy in these insurance companies are built to frustrate providers and reduce the ability for providers to get paid fairly. And it is an old, antiquated way of thinking. It is not how all senior leaders in these healthcare payer organizations think, but they are fighting the same fight that we are. They're trying to change the mindset of their own people, and it's hard.
CJ, is there any hope left for surgical assistants who want to remain independent?
100%. I mean, what I would tell you, Tyler, is that there's always hope, right? When surgical assistants choose to become employed by a health system, it's the beginning of the end. Because in any situation, and again, we've heard this on a couple of different podcasts with different people who you wouldn't think would cross over in how they process this piece of information. But becoming an employee of a health system is the beginning of the end for lowering cost and increasing quality. What you end up with is you end up with surgical assistants who become generalists, not specialists, and that is not in the best interest of the surgeon. It's not in the best interest of the patient, and it does not do anything to reduce average OR time. And that's one of the key drivers in this. I would tell you that independent surgical assistants can focus, if they're willing to focus on clinical excellence and technical proficiency, but partner with somebody like us who can help take care of all the rest. Scheduling, insurance negotiations, hospital negotiations, being able to do everything that surrounds the practice of technically delivering service in the operating room, managing quality metrics, aligning with other like-minded independent physician groups. That's what we do. That is what TexAssist is being built to do. We are not being built to be an average Joe at anything. In fact, I see our business in two very different but connected silos: technical excellence and administrative excellence. And trying to mix those two is a slippery slope, because it becomes jack of all trades, master of none.
Yep.
Right? What I want is, I want people, and I want organizationally to have just a kick-ass technical development program and support infrastructure. So we train and develop ninjas, not ninnies. Right? We need surgical ninjas, not ninnies. A warm body is not adequate in the surgical assistance role. Can you get by with a warm body in other positions in the operating room as part of the support staff? Probably so, but not in the surgical assistant. That person can make or break a case. And I will give you a perfect example. Okay. Patient goes in for radical prostatectomy. Okay. The doctor says, we're doing this robotic assisted. They get into the patient's lower abdominal area. There's a lot of adhesions. There's a significant amount of blood loss. And because of impairment in the visual field and the surgical assistant not knowing when to suction and when to back out, a major vascular structure gets nicked and all hell breaks loose, and they can't find where they nicked it. And now they have to take this patient and they have to remove the robot and open them up and perform an open procedure. What did you just do? You just increased the surgical time. You just increased the amount of tissue that's exposed to open air and potential for surgical site infection. You just increased blood loss, which can increase potential complications from secondary conditions. So in this situation, Tyler, I will tell you that I don't pretend to be a surgical assistant. What we have done is we have gone and hired the best of the best in their respective specialties, whether that's surgical robotics, cardiothoracic, orthopedics, and have asked a core team of senior assistants to man that side of the house. Tell me what you need, tell me how you're going to execute, and tell me what our outcome is going to be. How are we going to be better? And then I am working with my team on the administrative side to make sure that we are managing payer relations, that we are managing hospital relationships, and helping understand what the hospitals and health systems are seeking. Because I will tell you right now that we are on fire with those conversations. We are resonating.
It's really an incredible value proposition. I've been around CJ enough to hear the ups and the downs and the peaks and the valleys and the hurdles that you have to get over with all of these different complex topics. And one of the things that comes to mind for me, CJ, is I think about my role and as a family officer and working with doctors. And one of the common themes that comes into play, and I think it's important when you look at it from the healthcare space at large, is that typically doctors want to do what they're great at. And that's either taking care of patients, operating on patients, doing the things that they went to school for, all that technical training and expertise. And what they're really terrible about, or at least don't like very much. I remember one of my doctor clients saying the best thing that ever happened to me when I went out of private practice back into the hospital is that I didn't have the note on my desk from an assistant saying the printer cartridge needs to be replaced, or this is broken, or this doesn't work. And so what that tells me, especially when we look at it from a surgical staffing standpoint, is that these talented individuals want to work with a group like TexAssist where they can get the appropriate training to be able to give the very best that they can and in the surgery room, but at the same time know that when they're done for the day, they've got a staff of people that are doing all of the heavy lifting on the business side for them, helping them make sure they get paid in a timely manner, and that that administrative side of it is handled for them. So I just think that's huge. And I think what you guys are doing at TexAssist and in creating this turnkey operation for surgical assistants is really terrific. As we wrap up today, CJ, I want to hear some of your final thoughts and talk with us a little bit about how to get in touch with TexAssist, things that you guys are working on, and anything else that you think would be great for our audience to hear.
Yeah, I mean, look, I will tell you, Tyler, that one of the things that makes a surgical assistant so incredibly good also can be their worst enemy. Letting go of control is the most difficult thing to do for a highly skilled clinician, right? When they are in their realm, in the operating room, they are in full control. Okay. But the moment that they step out and they're no longer in that technical arena, hanging on to something purely because you want or need to control it is what will ultimately suffocate you as a surgical assistant in the environment we're living in today. If I can talk to any one of our surgical assistants that might be listening and thinking about how the hell am I going to navigate through all this, understand that I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. Nobody administratively on my team is going to tell you how to do your job, because we don't do that job. What we do is everything else. And the surgical assistants who have come to work for us that have figured out that there is freedom in letting go of all the administrative bullshit, and we actually have the horsepower and we can deliver, are happier than pigs in dirt, right? But there is this level of distrust in our industry that exists that at one point or another, Tyler, if the surgical assistants want to not be somebody's bitch, that's just the best way to put it, right? You don't want to be an employee of somebody, you better figure out how to let control the administrative side and give it to somebody who's got more horsepower than you. Because otherwise you're done. Just pack up shop, go sell hot dogs, because you won't be able to make money at this anymore. Because you can't do it by yourself.
Well, it's great thoughts. And for those listening, CJ tells it like it is. And I think the number one thing in the healthcare industry at large is this great need for just blatant transparency. We've got to be transparent. We got to call it for what it is. And we've got to, as you said, team together and come together to combat these issues together. I mean, that's just what has to happen. 100%. CJ, how do folks go ahead?
Let me add one more thought, right? Because I think it's really important for people to know that I'm not just working on hospital. Our group is not just working on hospital and health system relationships. We have formed an affiliation and a relationship with the single largest multi-specialty clinically integrated network of surgeons and what I call proceduralists in North Texas. We have thus been invited to participate in negotiating a full-blown value-based care agreement with United Healthcare. So, who used to be known as the cash cow and the bell cow for out-of-network payments has now gone to near zero. And now we have been invited to be the lead voice in negotiating a major arrangement for surgical assistants in North Texas. United Healthcare, per Scott Flannery's comment last week, they insure almost 800,000 lives in North Texas and another 300,000 in Oklahoma. So there's well over 1 million lives that we could impact if we can get something done here. And that's saying something. I can't drive home enough that, look, at the end of the day, have a conversation with us. If you don't like what we have to say, go do it on your own. But don't kid yourself. No conversation is way worse than a conversation that you have and you don't like and then you walk away. So there's a couple different ways people can find us. They can find us on LinkedIn, TexAssist LLC. Look us up. We got a pretty good presence up there. You can find me personally by shooting me an email at cj@texassist.com. You can also call our office, 469-250-4422, and work the phones, connect with one of our staff members. We've got 2 full-time business development executives that can talk this talk and speak this language. We're here to be a tool and a resource, because I will tell you right now that January 1 of next year, darkness is here to stay. And everything that I've read and learned about all this legislative movement on a federal level tells us that we better be preparing for nuclear winter when it comes to insurance reimbursements if you think you can just stay out of network. It is going to be ugly. And it's going to be 2 to 3 years before any amending legislation could get passed. And I say could, to try to right the ship, because what happens in legislation, we go from one extreme to another before eventually it swings back to usually somewhere in the middle. And that's where we are right now. It's been very reactive about this out of network stuff, swinging all the way over here to just completely shut it off. And if people don't have a plan for how they're going to deal, I'm not optimistic for those folks. I think there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of people who are paralyzed. Don't be paralyzed. Talk to us. We can help.
Terrific. CJ, I appreciate it. This has been very insightful, and it continues to fascinate an average Joe like me to hear what's really going on out there as you try to sort through all of this legislation, which I'm finding as an average Joe, most people don't read it, including the politicians that write it, so or approve it. So really interesting stuff. This has been episode 13 of The Cutting Edge. Again, we'd like to thank our sponsors. Couldn't do it without you. TexAssist, of course, Ortho, Lone Star, Moonshot Marketing, and the Carrington Group. We appreciate you being with us. Episode 14 coming up next week. CJ, what do we got? What do we got on the docket for episode 14?
So next week we have Brett Lee, president of Texas Health Hospital Frisco, joining us to talk about the evolution of public-private partnerships in the hospital space. So interesting conversation, learning about the somewhat odd partnership of UT Southwestern with Texas Health Resources to form that campus in Frisco. It's I'm excited to learn a lot more about how that came about, what benefits the community seen, and just lay it all out there, because I think we're going to see more of these non-traditional partnerships emerge in healthcare as innovation reigns.
Terrific. Well, thanks everybody for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you next week for episode number 14. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.